Death spiral. That's how the governor of Puerto Rico describes the direction his economy could be heading. Alejandro Garcia Padilla said his Commonwealth's debt must be restructured. At the same time, Fitch cut its rating to CC. Puerto Rico has been troubled for decades. So why is the island and its 3.5 million people now facing a Greek-like default? Michelle Kaske from Bloomberg News is with us. Michelle, when will Puerto Rico default?
Well, that remains to be seen, but it looks like it's getting closer and closer. They did yesterday, the legislature approved a budget that does allocate $1.5 billion towards repaying its direct debt, general obligations and direct debt of the government. But their main utility, their main electricity provider, has a July 1st deadline. And
I'm lost. The Commonwealth of Massachusetts, there's the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico, but Puerto Rico has a different rule book. Is it fair to the American taxpayers?
Is it fair to the American taxpayers?
That they're a Commonwealth and they're going to be treated differently than a state or Detroit? For that.
They can't go bankrupt, right? So
right. They don't have the legal ability to, their entities don't have the legal ability to file for Chapter 9 in the same way.
So what would happen to them? I'm curious what happens to them if they continue this spiral.
Well, what happens is that eventually if they do an actual payment default, then you'll have a rush of different creditors heading to different courts suing the Commonwealth.
So there's a debate in Washington about whether or not they should be able to file for bankruptcy, right? What's the argument for them being able to file for bankruptcy, and what kind of people are making this argument?
Their congressional representative, he has crafted this bill to allow Puerto Rico entities to file for Chapter 9. And what some people believe that would do is it would offer a legal framework, a blueprint, and that would make this an easier process to get through this debt restructuring.
Can we just put it off? Can we put it off for
We've been doing that for 30 years.
That's what they've been doing.
Phil and Bowder, jump in here, please. I mean,
Puerto Rico is in the unfortunate situation that it can't file for Chapter 9 for basically protection from creditors, and it also cannot call on the IMF to come in and provide it with funds. So they're in the worst of all possible worlds.
Oh, they're in the worst of all possible worlds. But, you know, bring up the chart here, Loriana, if you would. I mean, I mean, Madame Lagarde's not going to come to the rescue here. They're on the edge of Athens. Down they go. This is just one of their bonds from 100 down to 40. They can't call on Madame Lagarde. They can't call on President Obama. Who do they call on?
Well, they call on their citizens. Their citizens are going to have to endure less public services. They're going to have to pay more in taxes and fees, and they're going to have to learn to live with a smaller
But don't they have a limitation of a minimum wage structure and other voting issues and Jones Act issues where their hands are behind their back, tied because of Washington? Washington won't bail them out. What is the outcome now that we're finally at this point?
Well, the outcome is that they're going to have to they're going to have to start some austerity measures, cut spending even more. And maybe something can come out of Washington in terms of, you mentioned the Jones Act, maybe that can be changed. Maybe they can be exempt from federal minimum wage restrictions.
So if they can't file for bankruptcy, they have to restructure like a sovereign would, right? So this is going to go through some negotiations. It could be a little bit painful. What kind of recovery are people expecting on these securities?
So a bond goes from 100 to 30. What do I get?
Well, that's the ultimate. That's the big question: is which Puerto Rico credits will actually go through restructuring, and what would your recovery rate be for PREPA, their main utility provider, which is the closest entity reaching a possible default? Moody's has suggested a recovery rate of about 65 to 80%.
Not that bad. Not so bad.
If it's 80%, that's not that bad.
80% is phenomenal.
Yeah,
8-0.
Considering what the
Phil and Bowder, is this part of the new mediocre? Lagarde's made a lot of press with the new mediocre, as you know, whether it's the Philippines or it's Argentina, as Katya mentioned earlier, and now San Juan. Is this the new mediocre that we're going to live?
This is a very old problem, and it is, I think, part of the old mediocre. The new mediocre affects a whole bunch of countries that were previously viewed as, or no, sub-country entities that were previously viewed as sound. And so it is a global issue now, no longer an issue specific poor countries.
Real quick, Michelle, about half of mutual funds are still at least partially invested in Puerto Rico. With these downgrades today, will some of them have to get out now? Will they be mandated to get out?
No, because Puerto Rico has been a speculative grade, junk grade for well over a year. So a lot of these funds that were restricted have either reduced their holdings or have gotten out already.
Right. Okay.
Michelle Kaske, thank you so much. With Bloomberg News on a story that would be front and center. Professor Bowder, thank you so much for coming.
My pleasure.